Something is happening inside Bethel headquarters, and the people who know the most about it are the ones least able to speak. Across the last several years, a quiet but unmistakable pattern has been unfolding inside the administrative core of the Watchtower organization. Longtime staff members, some with 30 or 40 years of uninterrupted service, disappearing from their posts without announcement, without ceremony, and without public acknowledgement of any kind. No farewell gatherings in congregation newsletters, no tributes on JW broadcasting, no names honored in the service reports, just absence where there used to be presence and silence where there used to be institutional authority. But here is what makes this story different from anything the organization would want you to think about too carefully. The people being removed appear to be not the ones who failed, but the ones who know the most. This video is going to take you inside that silence. By the time you reach the end, you will understand not just what is happening at Bethel, but why, and what it reveals about an organization quietly reshaping its own institutional foundation while presenting a face of unity to the world. You are going to learn how a documented pattern of mass reassignments stretching back a decade has, in more recent years, given way to cases that seem far more targeted and selective. You are going to understand why the removal of Anthony Morris III from the governing body in February 2023, without explanation, without precedent, with his video scrubbed from JW.org within 39 days, is not an isolated incident, but the most visible tip of a broader process. You are going to see how two of the most senior administrative figures at Warwick headquarters ended up sanctioned by a federal court in 2024 for their conduct during depositions, and what that tells us about the lengths the organization goes to in order to protect its institutional narrative. Before we go further, if this kind of investigative reporting matters to you, take 5 seconds right now and subscribe to this channel and leave a like on this video. It helps this content reach people looking for exactly this kind of analysis. Now let's get into it. There is a concept in organizational theory called institutional memory, the accumulated knowledge, historical context, and procedural understanding that long-serving members carry inside them. It cannot be transferred in a training session. It lives in people. Organizations that lose institutional memory do not simply become less efficient, they become easier to rewrite. And that distinction is critical to everything that follows. To understand what is happening now, you have to go back to 2014 and 2015, because that is when the modern template for institutional removal at Bethel was first deployed at scale. As the organization relocated its headquarters from Brooklyn to Warwick, thousands of longtime Bethelites were quietly removed from full-time service. Insiders who spoke to JW Survey at the time described a letter read at morning worship warning of substantial changes. What followed was, by any honest measure, devastating to the people affected. Former Bethelites sent home during this period were typically in their 40s and 50s, with no savings and no employment history. There had been an unspoken organizational rule, never formally written but deeply understood inside Bethel culture, that if you accumulated 15 or more years of service, the organization would care for you through old age. That rule was simply canceled. A South African couple whose situation the Watchtower itself described in an October 2018 study article, framed as a testimony to spiritual resilience, admitted they had no savings and could not find work for 3 months after leaving Bethel. The organization's framing was that unexpected changes lead to unexpected blessings. What their story actually describes is two people in late middle age with decades of institutional service and no economic floor beneath them. The article never named who made the decision to send them home, who signed the letter, or who authorized the reassignment. The passive voice was used throughout. And that passive voice is not accidental. It is a shield. In Central America alone, the number of branch office staff was reduced from roughly 300 to approximately 75, as branches consolidated under Mexico headquarters. Painful? Yes. But even then, the 2014 and 2015 reassignments were at least explainable in financial and logistical terms. The organization was moving. It was downsizing. What appears to be happening now, however, is something different. More selective, more targeted. On February 22, 2023, a brief announcement appeared in the JW.org newsroom. Anthony Morris III was no longer serving as a member of the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. No reason given, no context provided. Morris had served on the governing body for 17 years, appeared in 8 episodes of JW broadcasting, and was one of the most publicly recognizable faces of the organization's leadership. Within the same day the announcement was made, every reference to him on the JW.org governing body page was removed. his name deleted. The feature image that included him replaced with a generic corporate photograph. Within 39 days, all of his morning worship videos, dozens of them, had been purged from JW.org entirely, with even the Amazon Web Services hosting links scrubbed clean by April 6th. The announcement itself was removed from the newsroom within 4 days of being posted. This had not happened before. Not once in the organization's modern history had a sitting governing body member been removed without explanation. Governing body members, once appointed, serve for life. The only remotely comparable event was the removal of Raymond Franz in 1980, whose memoir Crisis of Conscience became the most consequential insider account of Watchtower culture ever written. But even that removal, 43 years earlier, came with more organizational communication than the disappearance of Anthony Morris III. The speed of the erasure was not the behavior of an organization managing a health retirement. It was the behavior of an organization conducting damage control. What happened immediately afterward is equally revealing. Property records filed in Robeson County, North Carolina, show that the Religious Order of Jehovah's Witnesses purchased a house in Lumberton for $249,000 on March 28, 2023, 5 weeks after the removal announcement. The sale had been agreed on March 7th, meaning the acquisition was in motion within days of Morris leaving the governing body. The deed is structured so that the property returns to the organization if certain conditions are not met. A house purchased and signed over within weeks of the most unexplained high-level departure in the organization's modern history. An arrangement like this could serve many purposes, including ensuring that someone with deep institutional knowledge remains supported and, potentially, discreet. The Morris case is the most visible instance of what has become a broader institutional pattern, using material incentives and legal instruments to manage the departures of people who know too much, binding their silence at the moment they are most vulnerable. The non-disclosure agreement has become, in documented cases, the primary instrument through which the Watchtower manages Bethel exits. Former members who have come forward through legal proceedings have described a departure process in which signing confidentiality documentation is presented not as optional, but as a condition of receiving any transitional support. When someone has spent 30 or 40 years at Bethel, living inside the organization's housing, receiving a small monthly allowance in place of a salary, the moment of departure is one of acute personal vulnerability. No savings, no employment history, potentially limited family contact outside the organization. The leverage held over a departing Bethelite in that moment is enormous, and that leverage is being used, systematically, to purchase silence. What is being silenced is not arbitrary. The people most aggressively subject to these arrangements share a specific profile: long service records, administrative visibility, and direct presence during the organizational decision-making of the last 3 decades. Consider what a senior Bethel administrator with 35 years of service would have witnessed. The internal coordination of legal responses to child abuse litigation accelerating in the early 2000s, the financial repositioning during the Brooklyn property sales that generated hundreds of millions in asset liquidation, the decision-making around the Ramapo construction project. Their knowledge is not a legacy to be honored. It is a liability to be managed. The connection between institutional memory management and legal exposure is not theoretical. It has been demonstrated in federal court with a clarity the organization's public communications would never acknowledge. Gary Bro serves as the overseer of the governing body's service committee, one of the most senior administrative positions in the organization. Alan Schuster has served within Watchtower's legal and administrative structures since 1981. In December 2023, both sat for depositions in the Kakert v. Watchtower case in federal court in Montana, a child abuse lawsuit that ultimately resulted in a historic settlement. The motion for sanctions filed by plaintiffs' attorneys in April 2024 described the conduct of both men in those depositions in terms the court found sufficiently serious to warrant judicial action. The sanction was granted, with an expenses order, reimbursement of certain costs to the plaintiffs, signed by Judge Susan P. Waters on June 10, 2024. Schuster, across multiple depositions spanning more than a decade in cases from California to Montana, consistently presented the governing body as a purely religious body with no operational authority. Plaintiffs' attorneys challenged this using Schuster's own earlier testimony, in which he described the governing body as the body that approves policies and guidelines governing the organization, including those pertaining to child sexual abuse matters. The organization's legal strategy requires its institutional witnesses to maintain one version of how it operates. The documentary record of how it actually operated tells a different story. Managing that gap between the public version and the documented version is precisely what the removal of long-time insiders is designed to prevent from ever finding a clear articulation in a courtroom or anywhere else. The incoming administrative personnel at Bethel are younger, with shorter institutional histories, and selected through a process that prioritizes alignment with the current governing body's direction above every other qualification. These are individuals who came of age in the era of JW broadcasting, who have no direct memory of the 1975 prophetic failure, the Raymond Franz period, or the doctrinal reversals that long-serving Bethelites lived through in real time. Someone shaped entirely by the organization's current self-presentation has no independent frame of reference from which to evaluate what they are being told. They cannot compare. They cannot remember. And that absence of comparative memory is, from the current leadership's perspective, not a weakness. It is the primary qualification. Organizations that are confident in their authority do not systematically remove the people who remember how they got there. They celebrate long service as evidence of continuity and divine favor. The Watchtower is doing the opposite, and that reversal, considered alongside the legal pressure accumulating simultaneously on multiple fronts, is itself a form of testimony about the state of the organization from within. When you put all of this together, the 2014 mass removals that established the template, the targeted cases post-2023, the Morris removal with its documented property purchase and 39-day digital erasure, the federal court sanctions against two of the organization's most senior administrative representatives, the NDAs deployed at moments of maximum personal vulnerability. What emerges is not a routine management story. It is a story about what happens when a controlling institution begins to lose control of its own information environment and responds by limiting the voices that could speak to it. The governing body that erased Anthony Morris from its website within 24 hours, bought him a house within 5 weeks, scrubbed his videos within 39 days, and never explained any of it to the 8 million people who watched him on their screens for years. That governing body is not operating like an institution confident in divine authority. It is operating like an institution managing risk, and the risk it is managing is the testimony of its own people. Organizations that systematically erase their own past are, without exception, afraid of their own future. If what happened inside Bethel over the last 30 years could withstand the testimony of everyone who was present, why is the organization working this hard to ensure that testimony never comes? If this investigation gave you something concrete to think about, specific events, specific documents, specific patterns you had not seen assembled this way before, please leave a like on this video. It costs nothing, and it makes an enormous difference in how this content reaches the people who need to see it. Subscribe if you are not already. The story does not end here, and the next video goes even deeper into the documentation. Make sure you do not miss it.